There are a million ways to cook ribs. Today I'm going to show you how I like to cook ribs, both for myself at home and also for my barbecue classes or private events. I'm going to show you a typical Texas style rib, so real simple on the seasonings, a little bit of sauce, and this is pretty much the rib recipe that I haven't deviated from in probably a year, maybe a year and a half. It just hits all the levels that I want in a rib, both texturally and the flavour. So we're going to start off with this rack of St. Louis cut spare ribs being my preferred rib over baby backs. These US import ribs, a St. Louis cut, but they got a lot of meat on them, so I'm going to use these. So for those of you in the UK, you might know these as the farm food ribs, because you can occasionally pick them up at Farm Food, which is like a discount frozen food store. These ones actually aren't from Farm Foods, these are from Tom Hickson, and if you can pick them up cheap in Farm Foods, then I definitely recommend it. We're not going to do too much to these at all in the way of prep. We are going to take off this bit. Quite often you'll get this end that's got a layer of meat, a layer of fat before it gets to the rib meat. And what tends to happen is there will be a nice pellicle form on this top layer of meat. The fat underneath will render, and then when you come to slice it, it will just slide off and you'll be left with an unseasoned rib underneath with a layer of fat on top. So we're going to take it off. Should use the sharper knife and just take a little bit of that fat down, not too much, just enough so that everything that is left is likely to render. I'm not going to do too much in the way of shaping these off, maybe just nip this corner off here, just round it off. Yeah, really not too much. Obviously, St. Louis cut typically come well trimmed. You don't really need to do too much with them. This will go into my sausage scraps, and we've got our rack of St. Louis cut spare ribs. So we are not going to be taking the membrane off. I think if you're cooking like competition style, or you're relying heavily on a foil wrap or any kind of wrap to get your ribs tender, then you may want to think about taking the membrane off. But we're going to cook these today completely unwrapped, and the reason for that is I think you get a much better texture. You get a lot more fat render. You get a lot less of that kind of jelly-like soft fat, steamed fat. And I think that's where taking the membrane off comes from, where foil wrapping your ribs to get them tender was quite a big thing, and what tends to happen is the membrane kind of goes soft and chewy, but we're not going to be doing that. And if you wrap really late in your rib cook process, you probably don't need to do that either. So we're going to be able to leave this membrane on. Also, there's a huge amount of fat under here, so all this fat in here, if we were to take this membrane off, you're exposing all that fat, and it's probably just going to drip off and end up in the bottom of your pit. Whereas leaving it on, it's going to render under there, it's going to be contained within the rib, and then when we take our slices later, we should have some nice fat on the underside, the bone side of your rib. So keeping it traditional Texas style, we're going to go in with some black pepper, and as always I use the Kirkland brand coarse black pepper from Costco, and I just add that to an empty shaker. We're going to go on from nice height and just add a healthy amount of black pepper. Pat that in, flip that over. We'll do the salt separately, presentation side, so I'm going to keep my shaker at a nice height, make sure the pepper goes on nice and evenly. And we can always touch that up in a bit. Then we're going to go on with a nice healthy amount of Diamond Crystal Kosher salt. You can use any salt. I have this on hand pretty much all the time, so that's what I'm using. And you can over salt ribs, definitely, so you want to be fairly careful about how much you add. Some of this is going to fall off because we're getting this straight on the pit. There's not much time for a dry brine happening. Doesn't look like it needs much of a touch up, which is good. So we're going to go on with our Diamond Crystal, our salt, and this is just straight salt and pepper ribs for now. We're going to add some sweetness to this in a bit, but typically that's how I like to season my Texas style ribs. So we're going to be cooking on my custom smoky oak barbecue 300 gallon offset pit today. We got that fired up about an hour ago, so it should be good to go. We'll go outside and put them on. So we're going to be starting off by cooking these at around 200 Fahrenheit, and we're going to put them right in the middle, bunch them up a little bit. We'll get them nice and smoky. We want to build up some nice colour, some nice flavour in the first couple of hours or so before we bump the temperatures up, and those will just sit in there maybe an hour, hour and a half. We'll come back, bump the temperatures up. Right, so these ribs have been on for a total of about 6.5 hours, feeling nice and tender. They've got a really nice color on them. Really haven't done too much to them other than cook them nice and low at about 200 to 225 for the first hour, and then I kicked it up to 250 to 260 for the last remaining 5 hours or so. Nice and tender, not fall apart tender. These are fully cooked. We could just rest them like this and eat them straight away. We're not going to cook them in foil or anything like that. We're going to take them inside and finish them up. And there's really not much more to say about how I cook my ribs. The goal for me is to get a good amount of seasoning on there, just simple simple salt and pepper, a good amount of smoke, a good amount of color, and as best as I can, avoid wrapping them. Again, because I like the texture that it gives a good fat render. You end up with less of that kind of steamed fat texture and a lot more like the fat that you get when you smoke a pork belly, like I did in a video a couple of weeks ago. And I just find that fat a lot more pleasant to eat. They might not be as fall off the bone as some people might like or how you may be used to, but I recommend just giving it a try. So as I say, these ribs are fully cooked, good to go. They got a really nice color on them, nice fat render. They're feeling nice and pliable. All we're gonna do now is wrap them up in some foil to let them rest. But what we're gonna do is add a little bit of sauce. So this is the sauce I made in my video last week, the Bahre barbecue sauce. This is just gonna add a touch of sweetness. Remember, this is just salt and pepper. I like a little bit of sweetness, a bit of acidity from this sauce. So we're gonna go down with a bit of this, not too much. I don't want saucy ribs, I want a nice glaze. And by glaze, what I mean is I'm not going for that kind of gloopy, thick sauce texture that you see on a lot of ribs. I just want a nice kind of thin, glossy glaze that's gonna coat the ribs, give it a little bit of a shine, but you're not really gonna feel like the ribs are sauced as such. You're definitely not gonna feel it, but you will taste it. And a lot of this is just gonna end up left in the packet, not on the ribs. And then we're gonna go in with a little secret for a lot of barbecue places, and this is simple syrup. All this is 1 part sugar to 1 part water in a pan, medium to high heat, stir it with a whisk, and you'll know when it's done, when it's no longer cloudy and it just looks like a pan of water. Let it cool down, put it into a little squirt bottle, and you've got yourself some simple syrup. So we've gone down with our barbecue sauce, and now we're just gonna cut that with the simple syrup. Again, this is gonna add that sweetness. It's also gonna add a nice gloss to the ribs. And then we're gonna go in meat side down, make sure everything gets a little bit of contact. And then maybe just a little bit more sauce on the back there. Take that end bone out. Make sure that there's foil contact all the way around. And that is it. Just to recap, these were cooked fully unwrapped. A nice smoky, cooler smoke around 200 to begin with for the first hour. And then we pushed it up to 260, 275, somewhere in that region to render the fat and get them tender. Wrapped them in foil with the Bahre sauce and a little bit of simple syrup. Just need to let these rest and we'll cut into them. So a fairly short rest later, probably 20 minutes or so, these are ready to open up and slice into. And hopefully they should have a nice glossy look to them. They got a nice shine to them, some acidity from that sauce, a little bit of extra salt. Do I risk it this side or do I flip them over to bone side? I'm gonna risk it this side. Take a couple of these middle ribs. And there we have a beautiful looking rib. Good amount of pepper. Oh, they look real good. Really happy with how these look. Good smoke flavor on them. They're not fall off the bone at all, so you've got to give them a little tug, but comes off nice and easy. More eat off the bone style. And not taking that membrane off isn't a problem either. Cooking them unwrapped the whole way, you don't even notice it. For me, it is the perfect rib. Good amount of salt, good amount of pepper, a little bit of sweetness and acidity at the end. And yeah, if you haven't seen that video on the barbecue sauce that I used, definitely go check that out. It's perfect rib sauce. I'm definitely gonna finish this rack. Just look at that. That is a great little rack of ribs right there. And that's pretty much it for Texas style ribs for me. Some of you might say that true Texas style ribs doesn't have sauce, and you're probably right, but I think that this keeps within the spirit of Texas style ribs, and they're delicious, enjoyable for everyone. Thank you very much for watching this video. Let me know below if you plan on trying this, or if you've tried something similar, or if you've got a different approach. I'd love to know about it. Thanks again for watching the video, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks for another one.